First off, this afternoon, my guest is David Axelrod. I've been trying for a long time to get him to come on and give us the magic elixir that is going to move those amazing voters who voted for Obama and then decided to vote for Trump back to the Democratic column. I think that's really our secret weapon, and I don't know anyone more qualified to answer a few questions on where do you see the state of play right now in rural America, what should our candidates be talking about in rural America, and how can we win those candidates back? So maybe, David, you can tell us a little bit about the outreach that the Obama campaign had in 2008 and then again in the reelect to rural voters and why that worked so much better than what it did for Secretary Clinton.
Yeah, well, first of all, it's a pleasure to be with you, Heidi, and you know more. You know more in your sleep than I could possibly add to the discussion of rural voters. These are your constituents. You understand them so well. You know, one of the fundamental precepts is if you want people's votes, show up. That would be rule number one. And we were very conscious of this, and we campaigned in rural areas. It was helpful to have a 50-state primary campaign, but in which we spent a lot of time in rural America. And remember, 87 days in the state of Iowa. But Barack Obama was also accustomed to campaigning in those areas because downstate Illinois was very much is a rural and small town area, and very much like Iowa. But he was very comfortable in that venue, and part of it was his grandparents from Kansas. But one of his gifts was he was comfortable in any room that he walked into, and so that was helpful. But we showed up. We because I think if you don't show up, the message you're sending is you're not really part of this. You're not important to us. And I think that was a big mistake in 2016. Obviously, when you look at the margins in Michigan and Wisconsin, it's clear that a more aggressive campaign effort there could have cut the Trump margins in the rural areas, but also encourage greater turnout in the metropolitan areas. So show up would be rule number one. The second is show respect. The fact of the matter is that, and I have a place in rural Michigan. I was struck by the fact that there were a number of my neighbors who had been Barack Obama voters who voted for Donald Trump. They're good, hardworking people who are struggling in a changing economy, and they felt discarded in some ways, and they also felt like the things that it wasn't even that they were hostile on many of the issues that were being discussed. It was that they didn't speak to their own experience. And, there are specific struggles to rural communities, and there are specific issues relative to the changing nature of the economy that are relevant to rural areas. And candidates should speak to them as a matter of respect and a recognition that, there are good, hardworking people out there trying to make a living. And then the other thing is, the cultural issues. The fact is that we did well in part because we stressed economic issues very strongly. We stressed the value of work and making sure that those who work hard can reap the benefit of that work, and that shouldn't be limited to geographical segments of our country, but to all our country, and that the middle class is the backbone of, and the working class is the backbone of this country. That was fundamental. Everybody remembers Hope and Change from 2008, but we had a fundamental economic message that we pursued from the first day Barack Obama became a candidate to the day he was nominated throughout his administration, and particularly in that first term. And it was very much the message of our second campaign. He was an advocate for the middle class and for working class people and people who were living from paycheck to paycheck. that is such an important message to send. And we stuck to that, and we tried to steer away from more divisive social issues.
I was going to say, I think that the kind of conventional wisdom coming certainly from the more progressive wing of our party is that, look, these are voters who are lost to us forever on cultural issues. You are just wasting our time. We're going to amp up, it's kind of the Trump playbook, amp up the anger and the angst in our base, in the far left base, and that's going to carry us forward. The problem with that challenge is you can't govern. When you're just inflaming the sides of it.
But let me just say on that point, I'm not sure that it's even a prescription for winning. When I look at the states that will determine the election, and we all know the system we have, it's not at all clear that alone, especially next time, will carry the day. And, I think you have to get some segment of that Trump voter to walk across the bridge. And I think, you can do that in part because, you can do that with women in particular, I think. I think it's harder with men. But, I look at polling and I look at where these rural women are, and various segmentations, non-college white women, and they are hostile to Trump. They're not in love with Trump, and they don't like his behavior. And and I've said many times, I think that there is an exhaustion factor with Trump, with the tweets and the tantrums and the gratuitous fights and the chaos that reigns around him. And I think that if you ask the question, can we really do this for 4 more years? Can we, the day after day after day of this, that you can break away some of these voters? There are subtext messages, economic messages about whether, in fact, they've actually benefited from his policies and so on. But ultimately, I think the exhaustion factor is a big one. But obviously, if you simply say, look, you're not in our tribe, and therefore you're not invited, they're not going to walk across that bridge.
I think that Trump's behavior has given us an opening. I mean, there's no doubt about it. So now all of a sudden people are saying, well, I'm willing to consider someone else. Not the hardcore Trump voter, but voters who reluctantly voted for Trump or voted for him on the idea that he was somehow going to change his behaviors. Now they're saying maybe we should look at something else. But you can't win elections with nothing. You can't simply win by saying, Donald Trump's behavior is not what I would expect from a president. You've got to have a message, I think, that resonates in terms of optimism for the future. And there's no greater difference between what you're going to see in this campaign than this deep, dark message of Trump, which is things are horrible and were horrible before I got here. And, now I've made them better because I alone can do it, which most people say, no one does things alone, compared to a message of optimism that we can be better as a country. And one of the things that I think is interesting as we kind of go through this process that we're going through right now with Iowa kind of looming, how would you evaluate the outreach to the Trump-Obama voters right now by the candidates that we have in the field? And what advice would you give to down ballot candidates on how they could approach those Obama voters?
Yeah. Well, first of all, let me say that certainly you're right. People basically at the end of the day vote about those things that are closest to home, and they're thinking about their future, their family's future, and they want to believe that there is a better day ahead and there's hope ahead. My point on the exhaustion factor is there is a price to be paid for the tweets and the tantrums, the gratuitous fights and the chaos, and that is that you never really get down to solving those things that are most important in people's lives. I'd start with healthcare as a major concern of so many Americans, and certainly in rural America, it's a concern. And there are others that go to fundamental well-being. So, I mean, as a candidate, I would make that two-step. I would say, we're never going to solve these problems if we're consumed every day, and then I think you can move on to a positive message. I actually think, to the degree that these candidates are focusing on things like these presidential candidates, like healthcare and the cost of college, and we can quibble about what the answer should be on those questions, but those things that are close to home, I think that it is better terrain. One thing I would say, Heidi, is you don't beat. You're not going to win a mud wrestling fight with Donald Trump. You have to be tough. You have to be resilient. You can't allow him to define the race for sure. But I think you beat Trump with jujitsu, not by trying to match force with force, and use his negative energy against him, because every time he lashes out, it's another example of what we can expect in the next 4 years. And I think for those people who are uneasy about his governing style, they're not going to be less comfortable come next November, but they do need to feel that the person they have is fundamentally sound and has in his or her sights their concerns, and who is not so far out of the mainstream that they are uncomfortable. And that, of course, is that is very much on people's minds right now.
Yeah, it's so interesting, because I keep thinking when I watch him, if I were kind of in the field, I go, there you go again. I mean,
right.
There he goes again. Right. Kind of the Ronald Reagan, look at this guy, like he's not ready to assume not just leadership of this country, but leadership of the world. And I think that's the uncomfortableness that people have that's created the opportunity. But I've been frustrated, I will tell you, because I think there's missed opportunities. So, everybody's running to the healthcare, but, we just got a report last week about the billions of dollars the financial industry has reaped as a result of this tax proposal. The same people who tanked the economy, right? And so, this is about priorities. My argument in Iowa would be, look, these are people who gave billions, tens of billions of dollars to people who tanked the economy, who never went to jail. And guess what? Our levees are broken, and we can't fix our levees, and we can't fix our bridges. Those are the kinds of arguments, to me, that will resonate, because all of a sudden, you're in the Donald Trump world of, we've got the best economy, I'm doing the greatest job in the history of the world. Yes. And you've got to start showing concrete examples about the failure of prioritization of America's problems. And I think that that's the kind of thing that we're trying to do at One Country, that really says, hey, don't just run towards what's comfortable or what you've poll tested nationally. Here's a real local issue. Those levees in Iowa that are creating huge flooding that make it impossible not just for rural America to thrive, but many of the larger cities, that should be one of the major issues.
Right. No, I agree with you completely. And I think that, one of the things about the modern media environment and the tools that are available is there is an opportunity to run an ongoing campaign. And some people are trying, my old friend David Plouffe is working with a group called Acronym. And there are others trying to micro-target these messages in these communities. So, the plant that the president promised to keep open shuts down. That's meaningful to the people in those communities, and if the beneficiaries of his tax cut were also the people who helped shut the plant down, those are the kinds of opportunities that in a campaign you would look for, and should be a constant sort of drumbeat in affected communities. And for sure, Democrats ought to be focused on that. I think the overarching thing is the sort of climate that makes progress impossible. But I think the example you raise is a brilliant one. That was a stunning number, the amount of money that the financial institutions reaped from the tax cut, and infuriating, I'm sure, to your constituents, and particularly surprising given the fact that the president ran against the swamp and the corruption of Washington. And this is a prima facie evidence of that. So I am in total accord with you. But those things are not. Those are things that will motivate people. I think if you lean heavily into cultural issues, you will drive them away.
Right. I mean, you think about what you do in campaigns. I mean, you're true to yourself, but you look for those messages that the people are already 90% with you. You just need to say, hey, look here. And the one thing that you will hear over and over again, I don't care if it's a Democrat, a Republican, an independent, these people who tanked the economy in 2008 never went to jail. They really never suffered the consequences.
Yes.
And now, not only are they not suffering the consequences, they're reaping huge rewards. That should have been, in my opinion, a huge Democratic opportunity that's been missed. And we're going to transition now to what's happening in Washington, D.C. as we sit here and visit with the impeachment trial. And, I'm not criticizing anyone, but I think there is this sense among kind of the Democratic elite, and I'm not picking on MSNBC, but, the people who just feed on MSNBC every day, to believe that the rest of the world is just watching this with,
Yeah, no, I agree. And you talk to these candidates, and they'll tell you that impeachment rarely comes up in their town hall meetings. People see it as an abstraction. They think that the vote is predetermined, and that maybe and the president's been very successful with at least some segment of the country in depicting it as a kind of scrum between parties. I think there is an obligation there was an obligation for the House to pursue this because it was such a brazen thing that the president did, but one shouldn't confuse that with where the minds of the average voter is out there, and that is the average voter is much more focused on the things that are right in front of them and not what they consider a Washington scrum. But one of the problems we have is that we live in a siloed society, and you were good enough to come. I run this Institute of Politics at the University of Chicago. We have this thing called Bridging the Divide, and we take students from the University of Chicago and pair them up with students from Eureka College, a small private college in central Illinois, rural college, where Ronald Reagan went, and another group from Arupe College, which is a 2-year college where a lot of young immigrant students go, and they spend time together in Chicago. They spend time together in central Illinois talking to people. They see focus groups of voters in both places, and it's an eye-opening experience for everyone because we are so siloed, and we need to break those silos down and try and understand what is going on in other parts of the country and in other communities. And the things that people in Chicago may revel in the changing nature and of our country and all the positive things that represents. There are other people who find those changes threatening, and Donald Trump has mined that sense of loss and aggrievement and cultural estrangement. And if we're going to, as you say, not just if Democrats are not going to just win an election, but if we're going to actually govern, there has to be a real effort to kind of hear each other and, as best as possible, understand each other, understand the problems that are prevalent in all communities and not just some communities, and reach past these media silos. And a candidate who has the best chance to be successful is the candidate who projects the ability to do that and is not simply going to play the reverse of the Trump game and try and maximize the base.
I think that's always the general debate. And obviously, where I'm on the political spectrum, much more moderate than many of my counterparts in former senators. And my point is, look, you will never win by being exclusive. You've got to come up with a message as Barack Obama did or Bill Clinton did. A message that is inclusive, that's hopeful, that basically tells people, most people will give up their own livelihood or, as success if they know their kids are going to be better. And I think that's one of the, whether that's a unifying, if you look across the cultural divide, whether it is in rural America with, conservative, culturally conservative people, or, in urban areas, everybody wants something better for their kids and better for this country. And, when you can convince people that Donald Trump is going to waste 4 more years in moving us in a direction that will guarantee prosperity for this country in the next 50 years, never mind the next 3, I think that's the winning message. And governability is going to be a huge part of the swing voters' interest. Can't you all get along and get stuff done? And the person who's played that the best, the person who's played that the best has been, I think, Amy Klobuchar. I mean, she's been basically out there. Joe has a version of that. They all have a theory of their case, and it's interesting to watch it play out right now. But I think I keep looking at them through the lens of, what would they say down at the Morton Bar? Now, Morton is a small town in North Dakota near where I grew up. And, there's a group of 5-10 guys who sit there and watch the news together. And, that's on television before they head home. And, what are they saying at the Morton Bar about all this? And if you can get them to do a little head nodding occasionally when somebody talks, you've got to weigh in.
Yeah. I also, and I think that it also goes back to my first, what you say is so true. It also goes back to my first point, which is, give people the respect of trying to hear them. Give people the respect of, of not reducing them to caricatures. And that, by the way, is true across the political divide both ways. But, I look at the winning candidates, and they're, as you say, they're people who are welcoming. They are looking for common ground, not for divides to mine and weaponize. And the country desperately needs that now. I'm. People would be surprised when I say this, but I'm not that. I've certainly come from a partisan background, but I don't consider myself excessively partisan. And my concern about this president, I don't like a lot of his policies, but there are a lot of Republican presidents and sometimes a Democratic president whose policies I didn't like. That's not the point. The point is that there are certain things that have to be universal, and that is, our institutions respected? Is there a rule of law? And then does the president consider him or herself president of the whole country and not just the part of the country that voted for them? Because if you go into that with that mindset that you're just trying to capitalize on your own base, your own political base, makes, as you point out, governing very, very difficult, and it's bad for the country.
I have a friend who recently gave a speech. We were at Hunter College together, and basically what he said is America's finding out that democracy is on the honor system. How many times in the last 3 years have you said, well, he can't do that? Well, sure, he can do that. He cannot show us his tax returns just because there's been a very rich tradition of people volunteering. I mean, so now all of these assumptions we've made about behavior and about hypocrisy and lying, they're out the window. And if in fact we say that's a successful political strategy and policy strategy, what happens with the next president? I really think this is dangerous.
Yeah. First of all, we do have values that we live by in our daily lives, and we should expect the President of the United States to honor those same values. But you're right. Every norm you blow up, every rule you ignore, every law you flout, it's very hard to put it back together again. Every institution you destroy, and that to me, I'm on this impeachment thing. I think it is a very real question as to whether in a divided country the United States Senate should remove a president of the United States, and what is the cost of that? On the other side of that discussion, however, is what are the implications of blatantly, flagrantly violating the spirit of the Constitution and doing what the president did without without any penalty? And does does it encourage him to do more? And B, what does it mean for future presidents? And so this is a serious, thorny discussion. It probably will get reduced to politics when the votes come. But the implications of what's happening are real for the future.
Well, it's interesting because if I were sitting in those chairs and I were a Republican, I'd be worried about how much I didn't know. I mean, so this idea that we're not going to find out all the facts, we're not. So what happens in a year or in 6 months when somebody comes forward with a credible claim of something else that happened? I mean, we've got that secret server box where they put all the inappropriate conversations the president has had with foreign leaders so nobody else can vet them. That's eventually, I mean, barring somebody purging all that, that's eventually going to come out. And, I don't want to pick on someone, but I want to ask Lamar Alexander, who is an institutionalist, who is a rational person. I want to say, what happens when you find out that he had a equally disturbing, if not more disturbing, conversation with Vladimir Putin? I mean, you don't know what you don't know, and that's one of the things that I think is most frightening, is that there is this consistent, and I don't know that I call it cover-up, but there certainly is a lot of butt covering being done by people in the White House to try and prevent the actual, total exposure of the crazy from hitting the public eye. And
there's no question
at some
about
point,
that. I mean,
you mentioned Lamar Alexander. There's a guy who is an institutionalist, a decent person, thoughtful person, and he's not running for re-election. You're a veteran politician. You understand the instinct for self-preservation, and there's a reign of terror in the Republican Party. No one wants to defy this president because with a tweet or an arch statement, he can send a movement against you in your primary. And they're all scared about that because they know that he will do it. But for those who are retiring, they've got to be thinking about something else, which is their legacy and their conscience. And we'll see what happens. My guess is, politics being what it is, they will try and do half a loaf and vote for witnesses. But at the end of the day, we'll say, whatever the president did, the voters will have a chance to decide in November. And that's a colorable argument. But
I think it would be interesting to do a straight up censure vote and see what happens in the Senate.
Yeah.
I mean, it's kind of like a jury when as a former prosecutor, you don't want to overcharge your case, right? Because you want that verdict. And I think that there's enough people who are disturbed by the behavior and who don't run any political risk. But I just want to point out something that you just said, David, which is, there's going to be people who are running who will do a political calculation. There's people who are going to have conscience. What people in this country want is everybody to vote their conscience,
Yeah.
And it's like, this is what has made the institutions, has weakened the institutions by not having that kind of traditional statesman-like kind of behavior where it's a constant, what does this mean for me, as opposed to what does it mean for the country?
Well, I'm not to in any way sound patronizing, but you're in certain ways. I agree with you, and I hunger for that, and I believe in this democracy, and I want to see a rebirth of that spirit. And I don't like the direction in which we're going, but people will say, well, Heidi Heitkamp, she voted her conscience, and now she's doing a podcast. So, And they look at Jeff Flake, they look at Corker, they look at the people who Trump has run out of public life. The people say, well, they keep raising the Nixon analogy, but this is really more akin to the McCarthy era, when there was this reign of terror and people were fearful that McCarthy would brand them as a communist or a communist sympathizer, and that would end their careers. And it was only when he took on the army and Eisenhower got exercised, and he had the great confrontation in his hearing with over the army, that the thing. So the question is, will the fever break? Will there ever get to be a point where enough people of conscience stand up and say this is as far as we can go? I agree with you. A censure vote would probably carry in the Senate. The question is Mitch McConnell going to put a censure vote in front of the Senate when you have a president and his legal team asserting that he did absolutely nothing wrong? That's their quote: absolutely nothing wrong. Well, he patently did something wrong, and it is shocking that there's so many people willing to stand up and parrot this line. And so, yeah, it would be great, because I think more important than I think that more important than whether he gets removed from office here, which I think does have cataclysmic impacts, is that a marker be laid that this is wrong. This cannot stand. This is not how we, as a constitutional democracy, function. And the president violated the rules. And he needs to pay some price for it. That if what happens now is acquittal, and the message is, no, you can pretty much do what you want. That is such a dangerous signal, as you point out, not just for this president who's likely to take advantage of that, but for all future presidents. It's a very unhealthy sign.
Yeah, it's so interesting when I talk to my Republican friends, and they talk about, these great things that the president's done. And I said, well, most of that stuff can be undone because he did it by executive order. He did it by simply reversing Obama policies. So he's done nothing that has any permanency to it. Even doing the tax bill through reconciliation creates an opportunity to undo it in reconciliation. I said, don't you want certainty? Isn't that really what moves this country forward? Is not, depending upon who's in charge, it happens or it doesn't happen. We've got to move this country forward. And it's always interesting, people who like Ted Cruz and Mike Lee, who I had to sit when I was presiding over the Senate and listen to him rail on about the constitutional breach of executive order, and to watch them now sit on their hands. I want to say, history's going to judge you guys, and you can have the glory today, such as it is, of being a United States Senator, but you're never going to be exceptional. You're never going to be exceptional statesmen in this category. And I think that's the real tragedy is with the loss of John McCain, and I think and great friends John and Cindy are to me. And I just honestly believe this, David. I think that if John McCain were there today, it would be a whole different view.
Yeah, no, I'm sure.
Number
that's
one,
right.
he was so protective of Ukraine to start out with, and the whole. It wouldn't have gone on as long without a major. He would have. Trump could not have withheld the aid as long as what he did if John McCain had been alive and in the Senate. There's just no doubt in my mind. And he always had the gravitas, and he would break wind. In the old biking metaphor, you get the guy up there to lead the charge, and people he would just suck people with him. Yeah, and that's gone. There's
Heidi,
no one like that anymore.
I agree with that. One thing I would say to you is, it's not just do you want permanence and predictability. When we got elected, George W. Bush could not have been more helpful to us in the transition. He to President Obama, all our counterparts in the White House, everything that we asked for, they gave us, and they went the extra step of inviting us over to brief us up on their jobs, to answer any questions. And they didn't do that because George W. Bush loved everything we said in that election. We were pretty hard on him. They did it because he understood that he was a trustee of the democracy, and that these institutions have to endure. As you said earlier, if we allow the sort of hammer blows to institutions and the rule of law and our alliances in the world and all of these sort of pillars, they're going to be very hard to repair. And so my view is policies can easily be changed, some more easily than others, but repairing broken institutions is a much harder thing. And so it seems to me that Republicans and Democrats need to make a stand for the rule of law, for institutions, for these fundamental pillars of our democracy, because without that, we as a country are not exceptional. And that is what worries me. So we'll see. And I suspect that I could get takers on that proposition in small towns and large, but
I mean, I think people are hungry for. If you ask a coal miner in West Virginia, do you think your children are going to be mining coal? Almost all of them, even if they said Trump could be a permanent president, would say no, they're not going to be mining coal. I mean, and so people are not so naive to believe that things aren't going to change. They just need to know what it's changing into and where they fit in and how they're going to thrive in that change. And I think that's where we have failed in rural America. I think we failed to say this is the change.
Yes, and the fact of I listen, I 100% agree with you. We need a government and a policy that has everyone in its focus, and we celebrate. There's no doubt that the new economy has produced enormous opportunities for those who are well positioned to take advantage of them. But it's created a lot of disruption in a lot of other communities and a lot of other places. And the challenge of the 21st century, because change is going to come more and more rapidly, is how are we adapting so that everyone can share in the opportunity and people aren't being left behind and communities aren't being left behind. And, so there's no doubt that the economy is strong. When I remember when we had 10.2% unemployment, and you do as well. When President Obama left, it was 4.7. It's now 3.5. Congratulations to President Trump. He knocked another 1.2 off of it. The stock market is doing well, but there is still this uncertainty and anxiety and uneasiness in many communities in this country because they're not on the right side of all of these economic forces. And so we need thoughtful policies that include everyone in it. And you know what? This is not just a threat. If we don't do it, there's going to be more and more cynicism about our democracy and whether it works. And then there's also going to be more and more cynicism about capitalism. And so it's in the interests of people who care about democracy and care about capitalism to respond to this challenge that's coming at warp speed and make sure that we're looking out for the whole country, not just those in a few elite zip codes.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because you like I do review the economic data, whether it is GDP or whether it is taking a look at macro, huge national numbers. But when you drill down, the growing unemployment rates, and there are turnarounds in unemployment rates in places where Trump did very well. Some of those places are seeing 4+% unemployment again. And I think the farm economy is going to struggle as we move into a transition where we have more and more competition. That lots of eggs have been put in the basket of Chinese market. That puts them in charge of our agriculture. We need to expand those markets. We need to look at, there's just systemic things that need to be done right now that are not being done because we are too polarized in our politics and we are not giving the American public enough credit to understand, we think those simple answers of okay, we're going to give you Medicare for all. Okay, so that reveals that I'm not a big fan of Medicare for all because it's a slogan. It's not a reality. And so let's talk about what you really need to do in healthcare. Let's talk about what you really need to do with the infrastructure. Mm-hmm. And I think that, honestly, I think that those voters who are sitting in the middle, who haven't made up their mind yet, who aren't part of a tribe, that's the message that's going to resonate with them. And there's a lot of those people in rural America. David, thanks so much for joining me. We could go on forever agreeing.
We could.
And I don't think we disagreed on one thing.
No, it's such a pleasure to speak with you, Heidi, and I so appreciate your service. I wish you were sitting in that chamber right now, bringing your good common sense to this discussion.
Well, I as I sit overlooking the Missouri River in beautiful North Dakota, I'm thinking there is no better chair I'd rather be in than the one I'm in.
Yeah, I hear you there. Great talking to you. Thank you.
Great talking to you. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much for joining us, and we hope that you all will follow us on Twitter at _OneCountry, all one word, _, or join us on the internets at onecountryproject.org.